I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology live from Cupertino, California. The iPhone 10 is here, featuring an edge-to-edge screen, no home button, and facial recognition technology. The price tag, $1,000. Plus, the new watch has cellular capability, allowing runners and other active sorts to leave their phones at home and still make calls and listen to music. And the whole event took place at the sprawling Apple campus. We are live here now in front of the Steve Jobs Theater, where it all went down. The theater that may have stolen the show today. An absolutely breathtaking place, multi-story glass walls, spinning elevators, and inside, 4 stories down, is where all of these new products were unveiled. I'm joined now by our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, joining us from LA, and sitting next to me, Mark Gurman, our Bloomberg tech reporter who covers Apple and brought us many of the details before they were told to us today. However, you got to hold the phone, touch the phone. I got to hold it as well.
Right.
Curious, your first impression.
Well, the iPhone 10, it's really hot. I mean, it's a nice phone. It's really cool, edge to edge. I'm sad that it doesn't go on sale till November, you know, as a fan of the product, and also from an investor perspective too, that misses a whole quarter of sales. So it's going to be interesting to see. But yes, it's nice.
You know, in terms of the product itself, you know, it is light, it is small, especially if you've been carrying an iPhone 7 Plus. The other thing that struck me was the height of the screen. You don't have to scroll so much to see what you want, and the facial recognition technology is key.
Yeah, I actually was able to set up my own face when enrolling my face, and you twist your head around like this twice. It's quicker than putting in like 5 fingerprints. I feel like I was the first person outside of Apple to enroll my face in Face ID because I didn't see anyone else trying to do that. But it's a quick setup process. It works really well. If you have a Touch ID app on your phone, it'll automatically convert on the 10 to a Face ID app. So they integrated it really well. And like you said, the screen is taller. You can see more video and text. It's nice.
So, Corey, I know you'll be getting your hands on one soon, I'm sure. But curious, from your perspective, you know, looking at the big picture, how big of an upgrade cycle do you think this will actually be, given that 80% of people who are going to buy this phone already have an iPhone?
Yeah, obviously the biggest change in iPhones ever was not having a phone into having a phone. That happened 10 years ago. But I think that, you know, it's a big upgrade cycle that they're facing an opportunity there for. And one of the things that Apple has found over the years is that when people when they upgrade from an iPhone, they upgrade to another iPhone. That it is a system in which they tend to stay. It's an ecosystem in which they tend to stay, so that they don't lose. Whereas when people leave an Android device, they quite often will switch to an iPhone. So over time, they grow that larger and larger. And the time between buying phones has been growing longer and longer, which suggests that this upgrade cycle could be a very big one for Apple. But the question is, are the users, you know, the unanswerable question, we can sit here and speculate, and we certainly will, but the unanswerable question is, will the consumers really feel the need to get this new device? So these bells and whistles, and the bells and whistles that are seen in an obvious way, not something you experience just with your phone, but something you experience when looking at your neighbor using a phone, is the thing that are going to help them sell this phone. So that edge-to-edge thing that Mark was just mentioning, the facial recognition stuff, those might be a more pleasurable experience for the user, but it's something that the person who has yet to upgrade is going to see and may respond by making a purchase of a new phone.
Right. It is a significantly different new form factor, new design, and interesting. Several analysts have suggested to me that it might discourage people from buying the iPhone 8. Why would you buy it if you could just spend a little more and get the most expensive phone? I was speaking to Gene Munster of Loop Ventures, who was here at the event, and he said, nevertheless, it's going to be a home run. What do you think, Mark?
Talking about the 8 as well as a home run, or the 10? The 10. The 10 is going to be a home run. I agree with that.
So what does that mean for the 8?
The 8? I don't know why anyone would buy that. In fact, they did this thing that I was a little surprised about. They raised the price. So the starting price before was $650. Now it's $700. So now you're about $300 between the 8 and the 10. And you look at that in terms of dollars per month, because a lot of people are doing these installment plans now. That's probably $5, $6 more a month. So I don't see why people would, you know, not get the 10 if you're on an installment plan. And I think that takes us back to why the delay. Why is this not coming out until November 3rd? I think this phone could have come out next week. week alongside the 8. But how many would there be available in an Apple store? Maybe 4 or 5 of them. But if they wait, they have more capacity. They've built up. Now that they announced, they have more people working on it. They can bring in more factories. So I think they're saving up for a big November 3rd launch and trying to have as many of these phones as possible.
And it's going to be available in many more countries on November 3rd than it typically is on the first day, correct?
That's right. It's a lot of waves happening at the same time here, 3 new phones and multiple countries per wave. So it's a big expansion of the iPhone.
I want to talk a little bit about the Apple Watch. They really emphasize the health features of the Apple Watch, the sports features. They actually introduced the watch with a surfer wearing the watch while riding a wave and getting a call on the watch. Corey, obviously I know you are obsessed with fitness trackers. Apple said today that this is now the most popular watch in the world. That's their numbers. But what's your take on just how much bigger a product category the watch can be for Apple?
Well, first of all, I need an Emily Chang fact check here. Was it a surfer? You're from Hawaii, and so you know. Was it a surfer or was it a paddleboarder? Because I've read both.
It could have been a paddleboarder. Okay, Mark corrected me. It's a paddleboarder.
No. You're
my
from
Hawaiian
Hawaii.
roots.
I'm from the Midwest originally.
I was feverishly taking notes.
Well, I think it's really interesting that Fitbit figured out what Apple couldn't, which is that it seems that the primary, the iPhone watch was launched with a I don't know what people are going to do with it business plan. And they threw a bunch of things out there and they wanted to see what would stick. You may remember Dr. Oz was there on the day that they announced the watch, and we got to cover that event. And they have always thought that health was going to be a part of it. But what Fitbit figured out was that really it was fitness that drove the sales of their devices, the fitness trackers, and indeed the Fitbit Blaze watch. They've had a lot of success with that product, again, focused primarily on fitness. So it seems that Apple's really figured out that as much as they thought fashion was going to be a part of their watch, that fitness is in fact the thing. And certainly showing off the waterproofing capabilities that other competing devices don't have in a very big way, be it paddling, and I'm all for the paddling, big fan of the Paddle Diva, and why wouldn't you be? But also surfing and swimming and everything else.
Right. Well, if you're in Hawaii, if you're in Tahoe, if you're in the water, apparently it works. That's what they say. Let's talk about the Apple TV set-top box. They demoed the box. They demoed the 4K capacity. Of course, you have to have a 4K TV set to enjoy all of this. It is impressive, but not if you don't have a 4K TV
Okay, so you asked me, were there any surprises earlier? Okay, this was actually a big shock to me. The 4K video, if you have 1080p videos in your iTunes library, they're actually going to convert those for free to the 4K video content. That is not something I would have imagined Apple would do. They would typically try to, it's a different video quality, offer both, charge more for the higher end. If they're actually upgrading them, and then when you buy it new, they're actually going to charge the same price that they would charge for a 1080p now that you would pay for 4K. It's a great thing, and it makes people probably happy that they bought a lot of movies from iTunes.
Interestingly, could Apple speed up the adoption of 4K technology single-handedly?
A little bit, because 4K traditionally costs more to download that content, and evening the playing field in terms of price, something that they're doing that could spur adoption. However, the box itself is $180, starts at that, so it's $30 more than the original Apple TV from 2015 with this new software and whatnot.
All right.
So, yeah.
All right, Corey, final thoughts.
Well, look, 4K TV is going to be table stakes, and the same that every new TV is going to start to offer that. They've got to have it. It's not like it was a fantastic invention. They're the first ones out there. They don't have all the partnerships they would like to have with 4K TV, but they're just going to have that as an option going forward. So I don't know that it's such a huge deal for Apple, because everyone's going to be expected to have that. What they're really competing against with Apple TV is stuff already built into TVs, and they've got to have a more compelling offering there.
Right. And we know that Apple is working with studios, or at least talking with studios, about creating special 4K original content. All right, Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large in LA. You're sticking with me. Mark Gurman, our Bloomberg Apple reporter. Great work. Making sure we had no surprises, or very few surprises today. We'll be right back live from Cupertino, California at the brand new Apple campus.
iPhone 10, the most advanced iPhone we've ever made. The incredible new design, Face ID, true depth camera system, and more powerful technologies than we've ever put in an iPhone before. It really is the future of the smartphone. The first iPhone revolutionized a decade of technology and changed the world in the process. Now, 10 years later, it is only fitting that we are here in this place on this day to reveal a product that will set the path for technology for the next decade.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang, live from Apple's brand new campus in front of the Steve Jobs Theater, where the new iPhones were just unveiled. Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large, joining us from LA, and sitting next to me, Alex Webb, our Bloomberg Tech reporter who covers Apple. I want to talk a little bit about the price, $999, the lowest price for the iPhone 10. At that price point, which we expected, how do you think the iPhone's going to sell in the U.S.? How is it going to sell abroad?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because there are two very different issues here. Clearly, in the US, there is a huge fan base for Apple devices, and there is, of course, carriers whereby you can spread the cost over a number of years. 2, maybe even now 3 years, as it looks as though that's what the innovation cycles are turning towards. I think in the US it will still do very well. The question then, when you turn to China in particular, where Apple is very much a status symbol, and therefore, if you're going to be buying the iPhone, you want to be buying the top iPhone. If you're not buying the top iPhone, then you may not be buying an Apple device at all, and you might then be turning towards the devices from Huawei or Oppo or Vivo, which have similar edge-to-edge screens, but are $300 cheaper.
Right, a lot cheaper. And of course, as we know, worldwide, Samsung is in the #1 spot. Huawei recently surpassed Apple globally. Corey, what's your take when you look at the market share out there and what Apple is up against? What's your take on how well this will sell?
Well, so first of all, Apple's never tried to really win the market share game. I think their goal is to win the profits game, which is to say they've identified there's a section of the market where there's an opportunity to make a lot of money, and there's a bigger market where no one's going to make any money, and they want to be in a place where the money is made. And so while they have, less than half, charitably, less than half of the market share out there of smartphones, they have well more than half of the profits in the smartphone business. And so I think that they recognize that across all their products, at all price points, they want to be there making money. And that there is a place, and it's not just emerging markets for their cheaper phones or their SE. I mean, Emily, my children, they're not getting the expensive phone because they're going to trash those phones. And so, there is a place in the developed market, too, for those cheaper phones, and they've had some success with the SE. I'll be curious to see what this does for their average selling prices, really in the first calendar quarter of next year, when all these phones are in the marketplace and we're away from the bump that you might see in the first sales in November and December, to see sort of what this does for their ASP and if it really jacks that average selling price for all the phones coming out of the company, because they historically have not told us which of the phones are selling, and we have to divine that out of the ASP information.
Let's talk about the cheaper phones, because they've actually had fairly mixed results. I mean, maybe your children love them, but in emerging markets and around the world, Alex,
their dad
haven't
loves
the
the
results
price.
been fairly patchy?
Well, it seems as it's a mix. It's hard to tell. Basically, Apple doesn't break down what they do. The key market they're really trying to grow in is India, and they're also in a strange dichotomy right now, where we've entered sort of an S-curve or getting to the top of the S-curve in terms of smartphone innovation. What can really come to a smartphone? So Apple has been trying for 2 years to announce that it's pivoting in a way, and it's moving towards services, which is why things like ARKit are really important. You can get more people buying apps from the App Store. But if you're really going to suck people into this universe of paying for things through the App Store, using Apple Music, using iCloud, all those things, well, you need to be selling the phones they can afford to buy. And that's the effort in India and other places, developing economies, where you really they've got to aggregate. What are they doing? Are they making money on the hardware, or are they paying money, getting more money down the line? Are they robbing pizza to pay Paul, so to speak?
You mentioned AR. Some folks were hoping there would be more announcements around AR today. They definitely featured a couple of game makers. For many years, Apple has been trying to pitch itself as a gaming platform. It hasn't been quite successful there. What do you make of those announcements?
They're clearly building blocks. You know, they're the first building blocks. We saw ARKit back in June when you spoke to Tim, and he was very bullish about it. The developers have come up with a huge number of apps which can go into the iPhone. It seems as if the hardware is pretty impressive. A lot of the stuff they can do on the new iPhones really enables quite impressive AR applications. This is the first step, really, in a market which they think could be huge. We've reported they're working on some sort of smart glasses that appear 2019.
Tell me more about that and when.
Well, the earliest we think is probably 2019. That's what we've reported when they have prototypes at the very least. We don't quite know how advanced those capabilities will be, whether they're full AR in the sense that you might see with HoloLens, or whether they're just information in your field of view in the same way that you had with Google Glass. But it is an opportunity to place more wearables on you, add to the watch, add to your AirPods, and probably still tethered to your iPhone, and therefore making sure that you still buy an iPhone.
Corey, this point about whether there's more innovation left in smartphones or not is very interesting. Peter Thiel, for one, has said he doesn't think there'll be much more innovation on the smartphone platform. When I asked Tim Cook about that, he said absolutely wrong, no way. It's hard not to be impressed when you see the new features, even if they feel a bit incremental. They are better. They are so much better. I'm curious, from your perspective, where you see innovation in smartphones going.
Well, I mean, I think that the innovations for smartphones are limitless. I mean, the innovations that came from the iPhone weren't better calls. In fact, arguably, they were worse calls, right? The innovation, and yet we still call them phones, but the things that people do on their phones are the things that have, the businesses that have come out of the iPhone are Instagram. They're Uber. They're things we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago that have become some really, really big multi-billion-dollar businesses and global businesses, and grown at paces that are only possible in the technology industry. So the idea that with this AR stuff, that what is now best expressed through Pokemon Go could be anything going forward, and so much easier to develop because of the development tools that Apple has created, the authoring tools that's part of this new operating system, and now the hardware in this hardware launch announced today. I think the possibilities are limitless, and I think Peter Thiel is wrong again, entertaining as ever, but wrong again.
All right, and Corey, by the way, there was a surfer and a paddleboarder demonstrating an Apple Watch. That's why we were all confused. So we were both right. Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large in LA, you're sticking with me. Alex Webb, our Bloomberg tech reporter, thank you, as always, for your reporting leading up to this event and the weeks going forward.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back with more of this live special from Apple's brand new headquarters in Cupertino.
We're at the next major inflection point. One that has the most stunning visuals ever, that are ideal for the large TV screens that are coming into our living rooms. This will bring cinematic quality to virtually everything that you watch. That's why I am so excited to introduce Apple TV 4K.
And now with iPhone 8, with its glass back, we're enabling the freedom of wireless charging. I mean, this is a simple thing. We do this every day. We use our phones in the day and we charge them at night, often on a charger by our bedstand in our homes or in our hotels. And words can't describe just how much nicer it is to just put it down and pick it up whenever you want to charge without ever having to plug in a cable again.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology, live from Apple's brand new campus in the Steve Jobs Theater, where 3 new iPhones were just unveiled, as well as an Apple TV set-top box and a new Apple Watch. I want to get straight to New York, and our Bloomberg Stocks reporter, Abigail Doolittle, who's been following the markets. Apple stock reaction a bit muted, but Abigail, why don't we start with what we saw in the broader markets today?
Well, it was a pretty exciting day, Emily. Quiet day at first, but then we finished with record highs for the major averages, the Dow, S&P 500, the NASDAQ, all putting in record highs. The S&P 500 also putting in an all-time high, the first time that's happened in more than a month. So despite the fact that the gains for the major averages were somewhat muted, up about 0.3%, we do have those records. And despite Apple, because even though Apple finished down just about 0.4%, so like you were saying, not a big move, very volatile in the day. At the highs, up 1.5%. At the lows, down 1.7%. So investors really trying to figure out what this new iPhone 10 means for the stock. Is this a buy the rumor, sell the news event? The stock, of course, is up in a huge way over the last year, up more than 50%. So today, a little bit of consolidation for shares, investors trying to figure out what it means. And of course, that could, Emily, for the stock, come down to not so much just the phone, but also supply. Will there be enough of these phones out there once it is launched in November?
Now, I know you've been digging into the reaction among the various Apple suppliers. What did you see?
Well, you know, not much of a reaction there, Emily. It's pretty funny. If we take a look at the likes of Skyworks, Cirrus Logic, along with Broadcom, those stocks all finished down modestly, down less than 1%. You'd think that there would perhaps be a bit more of a reaction considering that Apple itself was so volatile in the day. But that just wasn't the case, considering that these stocks could in fact be a tell to some degree for Apple, because these are the parts that go into the phones. So to some degree priced in. However, Emily, you know, there's a great chart that I'd like to show because it may suggest that there is sort of a boom and bust cycle, perhaps for Apple developing. This is G#BTV 7033. It's a longer term chart. Beautiful uptrend tells us how much investors love this stock. The buyers are really there. And we see between 2008 and 2012, the shares reacting very well to the iPhones. But then in 2012, if you remember that iPhone 5, that was pretty disappointing. The stock fell about 45% on that. And then the iPhone 5S and the 6, those were pretty positive. We saw a nice rally. The 6S, though, if you remember, that was disappointing. So we saw that correction back in 2015 into 2016. The question, Emily, is whether or not this new iPhone 10 will be enough to keep the boom going. Time will tell. I did speak to an analyst, Sean Harrison, over at Longbow Research. He's bullish on the long term, but he says that there could be some near-term choppiness due to that buy the rumor, sell the news possibility.
All right, our Bloomberg Stocks reporter Abigail Doolittle in New York. Thanks so much for the roundup. We're going to dig into why the shares didn't move so much, what investors are thinking, coming up live from Apple's headquarters in Cupertino, California.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. President Trump is expected to travel to the U.S. Virgin Islands to see the damage caused by Hurricane Irma. Virgin Islands Governor Kenneth Mapp says the trip will take place in about a week. The United Nations' most senior official on disarmament issues says nuclear testing by North Korea is a violation of global norms and the Security Council's united stance in taking measures to curb the North's behavior is crucial to international peace and security.
As far as I could hear, no one is really asking for any collapse of DPRK, quite the contrary. No one is, talking about regime change.
In Geneva, the International Organization for Migration says the number of Rohingya Muslims arriving in Bangladesh from Myanmar far exceeds humanitarian agencies' initial predictions.
As you can tell, with 313,000 so far since in this period, the system is clearly at full stretch and needs all the support it can get if all of these very vulnerable refugees are to be looked after appropriately.
Human rights groups accuse the UN of ignoring the ethnic cleansing taking place on a large scale against Rohingya Muslims. In Paris, protesters rallied against President Macron's proposed changes to France's labor laws. Macron says the moves will make it easier to hire and fire workers. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York. 7:30 Wednesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Looks like another bright day on the ASX today, with futures up 0.5% at the moment following another strong finish in the US. The iron ore prices also climbed back above $76 per tonne as local markets here wait on consumer confidence numbers as well. Over in Japan, a bright picture there as well. Nikkei futures higher. And keep an eye on Toshiba today. The board will meet to make a decision on the sale of its chip unit. The leading contenders at the moment are groups led by Bain Capital and Foxconn. And that sale, should it go ahead, is expected to net Toshiba around $19.2 billion. A few other things to watch out for today from Japan. We have PPI for August. Meanwhile, in South Korea, the unemployment rate for August is out. That's expected to see a slight tick up to 3.7%. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
We do have one more thing.
We're here at the Steve Jobs Theater at the new Apple Park campus. This is the iPhone 10. You can see it has the almost bezel-less screen, edge to edge. There's a little notch up here for the 3D face recognition sensor. You can see on the back it has a glass back now. Stainless steel edges. This thing looks really nice. This is the OLED screen, which really makes whites and blacks and other colors just pop out. You can see the time in the corner here. They sort of split the status bar. Bottom charger, and this has the wireless charging on the back as well. Overall, the screen is 5.8 inches, so it's a little bit bigger than the screen than on the iPhone 7 Plus and now the 8 Plus. But overall, this feels like it's about the size of an iPhone 7 and an iPhone 8, the smaller phone, because of the super slim bezels all around. And I know people have been asking about the side button. It's a little bit longer now. You can hold it down to activate Siri. I'll show you that here. Also, double click for Apple Pay. You can see there. Now to go home, as we reported, you just swipe it from the bottom. And you can invoke multitasking as well in there and just swipe between different apps. And the cool part about it is that the larger screen, you can see so many more text messages at once, and it's great for video as well. The iPhone 10 goes on sale November 3rd after pre-orders at the end of October, starting at $999 for a 64 gigabyte model. And there's also a 256 gigabyte version as well.
Our Bloomberg Tech reporter Mark Gurman there, trying out the new iPhone 10 here at the Steve Jobs Theater on Apple's brand new campus in Cupertino, California. We are live. Apple has just unveiled 3 new phones, a new Apple Watch, a new Apple TV set-top box. Our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, is joining us now from LA, and with me here, Carolina Milanesi, a principal analyst at Creative Strategies. I want to talk a little bit about AI, because AI is powering a lot of the upgrades that we saw today. You know, what in particular stands out to you?
I think what is interesting to me is how Apple can make AI relevant to the normal Joe Bloke on the street, and also appeal from a Wall Street perspective to investors to show where Apple is going forward. There wasn't much talk of Siri today, but I'll tell you why in a second. What we have learned today is that there's a lot of machine learning going on with the new CPU and GPU that the new devices have, as well as AI. And having the device to be smarter, but also creating a smarter union between you as a user and the device is where Apple is going. If you're thinking about Face ID, often they mention how Face ID is learning. So machine learning and AI coming into not just unlocking your phone, but then using your face to detect if you're looking at your screen and therefore opening up, for instance, the notification for you, or if you're not looking at your screen, not just randomly open your device. And then, you know, for a more mundane and just for a laugh, the Animoji that look at your face expressions, you know, your smile, the tone of your voice.
That definitely got the most laughs with the Animoji, which overlays your expression over an emoji. And
that you can use in a message.
Craig Federighi doing that.
Only he could have pulled that off.
Doing that on stage. I do want to talk about your Siri point, though, because there are some numbers to show that Siri is less popular this year than it was last year, and this is supposed to be the way of the future, right? Voice-activated smart assistants. Why is that?
I think consumers are still trying to find a reason to use something that they haven't in the past. You know, a lot of us are typists, and you know, our thumbs are so used to type what we need and get an answer. And changing behavior is really hard. But I do think that with HomePod being launched later in the year, Siri will have her moment. I think that the union of Siri and the home environment with HomePod will really have the next version of Siri speaking to consumer more. Today we heard about it when it came to watch, and so the idea that now with a cellular connected watch, Siri will talk back to me. And that's a useful use case, because I don't want to be watching a very small screen.
We didn't hear much about the HomePod today. We do know that the HomePod will start shipping at the end of the year. It was the big thing at WWDC just a few months ago. But Corey, this is a very competitive market, of course, with Amazon Echo and Google Home. You know, what is Apple walking into here?
Well, I think they're trying to come with a product that is of a higher quality and a sound-wise, and so we'll see if that can master that. The product, as I recall, is pretty cool, and I think that the buzz around it seemed like it was going to be great, and that the sound will be great. Now, I'll wait for the Audio Geek magazines to get involved and see what they think of the actual quality of the speaker. It is a world that is well, if not over, covered by the people who are big audiophiles, and I'd be curious to see how that does. But it could indeed form some sort of leadership there with much better sound quality and the relationships they have with the music industry. But I also think that this notion of what AI is and how it works is really going to evolve, and we're just not going to know right away. But the idea that Apple could, for example, use those emojis and see when you're smiling and when you're not, but also get the data about how many people, when they're presented with a smiley emoji after they've had a certain sort of facial moment, a facial expression, it will improve over time because they'll be able to measure. Just think of the A-B right there, right? You make a face, your phone thinks it's a smile, and then the third thing that happens is you choose whether or not it was a smile by selecting that emoji. Apple's going to internalize all that information, using AI, start to fix the facial recognition based on how many people use that emoji, and improve the facial recognition with every hour as more and more people are or are not selecting the emoji. Think about that 100 different ways when people are ordering food in Instant Messenger, when people are doing all the things that they do in Asia with Instant Messenger or chatting in ways that they don't in the U.S. All that potential is there.
I did actually get to try out the new Animoji feature. I was a cat, I was a dog, I was a robot. It was pretty cool. Pretty frictionless experience. All right, Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large, are sticking with me. Carolina Milanesi of Creative Strategy, thanks so much for stopping by. We will be right back after this quick break, back here at Apple headquarters in Cupertino, California.
There's not a day that goes by that we don't think about him. Memories have especially come rushing back as we prepared for today and this event. It's taken some time, but we can now reflect on him with joy instead of sadness.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology, live from Apple headquarters in Cupertino, California. I'm joined by our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, in L.A. And with me here in front of the Steve Jobs Theater, Horace Dedu of Asimco, once called the most accurate Apple analyst on the street. So I want to hear your numbers. The shipping data is a little bit later than we expected, but how many iPhones do you think Apple will sell in the holiday quarter?
I think the holiday quarter is going to be a record breaker. It was last year, not by much, but it's going to be a record breaking, so upwards of 90 million units is possible.
Really?
We're looking.
Gene Munster said 70 million.
Well, we'll see. The delay with the 10 might impact that. The super cycle dream is what this is all about. We're also looking at the ASP rising. So
that's the average selling price.
The average selling price is going to rise, and again, it has been rising recently, which is again against the grain for phone makers. But since the 10 years now, we've seen pretty steady iPhone pricing around $630 overall, over 1.2 billion units, and we might actually see breaking $650.
I know there's a $300 difference between the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10, but how many people do you think are going to sit there contemplating, maybe I should just spring for the more expensive model? And how many people might just not buy anything at all and wait?
Well,
so they can get that iPhone 10 when they want.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think tactically, this is a very pragmatic issue. I think overall, though, if we step back and look at the way they've bracketed this. They've gone from 64 to 256, huge increase in memory, and yet only $150 more in pricing. I think a lot of people are going to ask themselves, should I stretch? And also, they don't have the ambiguity of what do you do with this middle price and memory. So I think there's a lot of people are going to go up to the 256, and we're going to see more people stretch, and that's all good for the price.
256 gigabytes. Corey, Apple has some of the best margins of any company in the world. With the ASP, or the average selling price, rising considerably, what does that mean for margins?
Well, we just fundamentally don't know about cost. What's interesting about in some prior phone launches is the higher end phone with a higher selling price actually had lower gross margins, and then if you figure operating margins later, but just in terms of gross margins, lower gross margin. As you point out, at least in the hardware world, I mean, of course the margins are nowhere like in some businesses like software and so on, but in the hardware world they have maintained margins upwards of 35%. So we just really don't know, and another reason it's going to be hard to figure it out is because a lot of this componentry is going to be different. We also, and then it gets a little accounting geekery, but with all of these new advances in the software, we don't really know how they're going to amortize those costs into the cost of goods sold, so that gross margin could be affected by their notion of the duration of the value of software like artificial intelligence software that's been created. So it's going to be hard to say. Once we get our hands on some phones and we can crack them open and start to literally count the chips in there and count the componentry and understand what's in it, we'll have a better idea of what the components actually cost. But we really won't know until we get a clean quarter full of all of these sales at the end of the first calendar quarter to understand what that is, especially because these phones will ship late, and I would imagine probably about 10% fewer units than if the phone actually launched at the beginning of the quarter.
Now, Horace, I want to talk to you a little bit about the watch, because there's been a lot of skepticism about just how big a market can be. Horace, Apple announced today it's the best-selling watch in the world. Some estimates put, 41 million Apple Watches will be sold over the next year. That's about as many iPhones as they sold in the last quarter.
That's a lot. I'd go a little lower than that. I think that they've sold overall 30 million to date, and it's 2.5 years now, and that may even be a little bit on the high side. I think it's going to do very well. We're seeing it grow. Do
you think it's a sleeper hit?
It's a sleeper hit because all these tens of millions of people are using it every day, and actually we're getting a huge engagement. Apple is moving into healthcare basically with this product, and it's a $5+ billion business, which essentially overnight.
How much does the untethering, the fact that you don't have to have your phone with your watch, how much will that drive sales, additional sales?
I think it's going to be healthy. Again, I don't know how many people want to pay the extra $10 or whatever it might be a month to have that feature. Again, it's all about really making incremental improvements in this category, and I think the focus on health, the focus on diagnostics and prevention, it's really tremendous, and no one's really gone into that sector before. I've been bullish on the Apple Watch from day one. I've always felt it was a disruptive product, and now we're seeing it take on more and more of the roles of the phone. Will it ever take completely that role? We'll have to wait and see. Then again, the phone has never completely taken over the PC.
What's the other thing,
that's a great point there, Horace. I mean, I think...
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's a really great point that he mentions there. Imagine a world where we don't have phones. And today is the day that we start moving in that direction, because so much of the computing we're doing already in our phones actually happens online. All that brilliant AI stuff that starts to suggest whether it's an emoji or an address or whatever, that's all happening on the cloud. Now you're going to have this device where you listen to something in your ear and you've got something on your wrist and it doesn't interact with the phone. This could be the beginning of a post-smartphone world where you've got a lot of the things that are happening in the computing world, both happening in the cloud and being signaled by the devices in your ear and your wrist, but not on a phone. And that might be where we are 10 years from now.
Quickly,
and
do you agree?
AirPods. Absolutely. AirPods plus watch, all of this is decentralizing what used to be the hub, which is the phone. It's totally going to be, distributed computing and ambient computing, if you will.
All right, Horace Dedu of Asympco, always great to have you here on the show. Corey Johnson, you said it, I'm holding you to it, that this could be the beginning of a post-smartphone world. Corey, you'll be back with me after this quick break.
These are a new generation of iPhone, and they improve on everything we love about iPhone. The design is all new. It has glass in both the front and the back. The aluminum band beautifully matches the finish of each iPhone 8. It comes in silver, space gray, and a beautiful new gold finish.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology, live from Cupertino, California, at the Steve Jobs Theater on Apple campus, where 3 new iPhones were unveiled earlier today. Joining me now, our editor-at-large Corey Johnson in LA, and from our studios in San Francisco, Brian White of Drexel Hamilton, Global Head of Tech Hardware and Software. Brian, look, shares ended the day slightly down. Apple shares, why?
Well, I think you know, a lot of news is always anticipated into these events. But what really I like, you know, out of this event is the fact that the iPhone 10 is delayed, yet Apple gave pretty phenomenal guidance for the September quarter. And I can tell you, looking at the supply chain, and we look at that through our Apple Monitor, June, July, and August were very strong. In fact, September quarter for Apple Monitor looks like it's at a record. So to me, that was very, very encouraging. Here's the iPhone 10 delayed, yet the supply chain and Apple's outlook were very, very strong. So I come out of this event more bullish than ever about Apple.
Right. You can start pre-orders at the end of October. It'll be on sale starting November 3rd in a few dozen countries. Brian, we haven't talked at all about the charging technology. All of these new iPhones have wireless charging technology. There's a new pad that will be available next year, AirPower, where you can charge multiple devices, your phone, your watch, your AirPods at the same time. You know, what do you make of this step forward when it comes to charging technology and battery life?
Well, I think it's going to make everyone's life a lot easier. You know, just even coming to this event and all the chargers I had to bring with me. You know, if I'm able to have AirPower and just charge my watch, my AirPods, and my iPhone all at once, I think that's pretty significant. And so, you know, that's the thing about Apple. You know, whether we talk about new innovations like wireless charging or, you know, the 3D sensors they're embedding, you know, it's very tough, I think, as we go forward for competitors to keep up. I just don't see how they're going to be able to do it.
Interesting, given that Samsung is currently in the lead when it comes to global smartphone market share. Huawei is number 2. Oppo, Vivo, Xiaomi all have much cheaper alternatives to the iPhone. You don't think that's stiff competition?
So I've always felt, you know, Samsung is a great competitor. There's absolutely no doubt. Huawei's done a decent job. And I think outside of that, though, while Vivo and Oppo, we know the reason why their market share has gone up so significantly. You know, China's 4G network has expanded, and that has brought you know, consumers into the system to buy 4G smartphones that can't yet afford an iPhone. And I'll tell you what, as soon as they can afford an iPhone, they're going to buy it. And that's going to be trouble for Vivo, Oppo, just like it was for Xiaomi the last couple of years as Vivo and Oppo came to power. So a company like Apple that can do the hardware, the software, and the services, which is exactly what we saw today, how all those are intertwined, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. So yeah, Samsung, Huawei always be around. Outside of that, I really don't see much competition.
Tim Cook talked today about this being the first day of the start of a new generation of technology. Corey, I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the man who brought us here, Steve Jobs, of course, who co-founded Apple. The theater behind me is named after him. They opened today's event with an audio recording of Steve Jobs talking about what it means to produce wonderful products and give such things back to humanity. You know, at the same time that today is sort of the end of an era, it's also the start of something new, a fresh start for Apple moving to this new campus. And as we see Tim Cook's Apple start to emerge, he is speaking out more vocally about political issues, about moral issues. Corey, how do you see Tim Cook's Apple, Tim Cook's legacy shaping up? Corey? Brian?
Well, I think, you know, Apple, you know, has always had a North Star, whether that's making great products or on social issues. And I think Tim Cook has been more vocal, but to be honest, I think that has always been part of the Apple culture. And I think Tim Cook is talking more about it, but really carrying the baton that the company always had.
Well, we'll be talking about that for the next several years, the next 10 years at least. Brian White of Drexel Hamilton, thanks so much. And thank you all for watching this special edition of Bloomberg Technology Live from Apple headquarters on the day that the iPhone 10 was unveiled. This is Bloomberg.